Episode number 40, Martha Mann.
All right, cut to edge of stage. Great. All right, color frost.
Check. 1, 2, 3. Check.
Stand by, please. House to half, house out, running cues 1 through 10, sound cues 1 through 10.
Welcome back to The Title Block, a podcast about Canadian theatre designers, their history, and their craft. And I'm your hostess, Michael Cruz. And this week, a deep and delightful interview with venerable Canadian designer Martha Mann. Once again, this spring, of course, my studies took over for a little bit, so it's been almost 2 months since we had an episode. But I am back, and we'll be conducting new interviews over the next month in hopefully Stratford and Shaw. As well, the Bellows continues to meet, and there will be more Bellows episodes out soon. Now, Martha Mann began her career as a costume and set designer in the 1950s. Can you believe it, in Toronto? So she knows what Canadian theatre is all about. She's done extensive research actually into the amateur movement, which is what the modern professional theatre movement in Canada came out of. And we talk about that in this conversation as well. You may remember her most for her clothes in the very popular Canadian films about Anne of Green Gables from the 80s and 90s. And she's worked extensively in opera all over North America. Just before we get to the interview, I want to remind you again of the Patreon page for this podcast. Please find us at the Title Block Podcast there and help me to produce the show. I just made some more purchases of microphones to support the Bellows work and other panels discussions, so some more help to pay for that equipment would be great. And as a reminder as well, that if you use this show to teach your students about the history of theatre design, let me know. Email me at thetitleBlock@gmail.com or drop me a message at my Facebook page or Twitter at thetitleBlockCA. Now, join me and Martha Mann as we stumble right into a conversation in August of 2016 about her long and fascinating career as a theatre designer in Canada. First of all, where did you grow up in Toronto?
I did.
Toronto? Okay.
I did.
And you did you train here? Did you leave?
Well, I grew up in Toronto. My father had a very brief career as an actor. And I was an only child for many years. I was taken to the theater at a very young age, and I was entranced from day one.
Yeah.
Now, as I said to you previously, I was a year too old for the National Theatre School. What I had wanted to do was to go to NYU,
Right.
which I had talked to several people who were graduates, and it seemed the place to go. And then the good ones all went on to Yale, of course. But my father was very, I suppose I could say, anti-American. And in those days, people just didn't rush off to go to school and did what their parents said. And the short version of that is that I didn't end up going. So there was nowhere that was teaching stage design in any form officially. And so I went to OCA, and through chatting up and a lot of hard work on my part, I managed to convince the principal to, rather than take a one-discipline course, to take bits here and bits there and bits from other places that I thought would be useful. Now, the big mistake I made, they were all useful. The big mistake I made was not taking drafting, because in my life as a set designer, I was self-taught, and it's always been a difficult process for me simply because I have no background in it, in how you do it properly. But that's really where I came from. And then I was at OCA for 3 years, and then had involved myself, as everybody in those days did who was interested in the theater, in the University Alumni Dramatic Club. And I designed the set, and I guess the clothes too, although it was in contemporary dress. But I designed the set for the first production of James Rainey's The Killdeer, which then went on to the Dominion Drama Festival. And I, again, won the set design trophy. And about a week later, out of a clear blue sky, I got a phone call from the artistic director of the London Little Theatre, which was one of the few outside the CBC positions in Canada that was paid in the theatre, offering me a job as the set and costume assistant. And after a truly agonizing decision, I took the job and didn't go back for my fourth year at OCA, which probably, I mean, what it really meant was that a lot of things which you learn now at a school or a college, whichever you go to, I had to teach myself or figure it out for myself. So, I was a quick learner and picked it up fairly soon. And I was thrown into working in a huge theatre. I don't know whether you know the Grand in London, but it's exactly the same size as the Royal Alexandra in Toronto. So I was from, going to a theatre where I had done a lot of work, which was above a car repair garage, to a great big real theatre that had flies and lights and a soundboard and, things I'd practically never even seen before. So that was the kind of training that was available. And then, as I said, the first year I was at the Grand was the first year of the theatre school. And then I think the second or third year, they introduced the design program. But by that time I was engaged to be married, and I, had some work record behind me, and kept going and doing that. Yeah. So this was, as you probably know, this was in the early '60s. Yeah. The drama festival was in the spring of 1959, and then I went to London in 1960, and they had always had somebody who, again, like myself, was completely self-taught as a designer since they started. It was an interesting thing. That was a totally amateur theatre with a lot of money and a lot of very talented actors, but they had always had, and it was an IATSE house, so the sets were the building was taken care of, but they'd always had a designer, which I always thought was interesting.
And how long had they been around?
Oh, I think the theatre sort of became the Grand and the London Little Theatre in the 1930s.
Oh, wow. So that's a venerable.
It was venerable.
Yeah. And the designers they had picked from, do you know where they came from? Was it local?
Yes. Well, some of them I do. Mark Knagen, I believe, was originally from Montreal, but had come to Toronto to, I think, go to the art college, but that I'm not positive of. And then my predecessor was Wilf Pegg, who was a graduate of the U of T and was just interested in design and had designed a lot of sets for various community and amateur theatre in Toronto. And as I said, he was there for about 5 years.
Let's just step back a minute while you were in OCA.
Yeah.
You said you worked with the university alumni
Yes.
theaters. Now, were they part of OCA or were they a separate
No,
company?
they
So tell me
were
about
totally separate. They were probably one of there was a lot of very good amateur community theatre in Toronto, but they probably attracted the most interesting actors. I mean, you had to be a woman, you had to be a university graduate to belong, but of course the male parts were always invited. And I mean, a lot of well-known Canadian actors, William Needles, John Colicos, other people, Ron Hartman, other people started by, acting in those plays and getting some kind of attention, often through the drama festival. Right. And then when there was a theatre to go to act in Toronto, they did, and most of them were radio actors. Right. Or else they did something else and they were actors as a hobby. But a lot of the people who appeared with the alumni were, in fact, from the Toronto radio actors community, which was very strong and fairly large.
And this is the predecessor of what we currently call the Alumni Theatre, is that
yes,
right?
It is,
so
exactly.
that's a long history of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a history I'm completely unaware of, which
Yeah.
is really it's a deficit. This is why I'm doing this. It's a deficit in my understanding of where we come from. I've always been quite aware of the large amateur
Yeah.
roots of most Canadian theatre, but it's incredible that the not only that it's where professional theatre came from in Canada, rather than sort of a training ground for people who then go up to another level.
No,
It's
it
actually
is definitely
evolved.
where professional theatre. Well, read my chapter in the theatre history of Ontario that my husband and I co-wrote, and it's about the amateur theatre movement.
That's terrific. I will definitely do that. What's the name of the book?
It's part of that series of Ontario history, and this is the history of theatre. It's Ontario Theatre History. It's called, but it's part of a huge series that's ongoing. I mean, there's, the history of the canoe, the history of this, and the history of that, and the theatre is just one of the things it's a history of.
It's very comprehensive.
Yes.
That's excellent. And what kind of things did you study at OCA? Was it sort of all?
Yeah, I spent a lot of time with the interior design people because I don't draw particularly well like some designers do. And I knew that was an area that I really had to, concentrate on. And there's a great difference between designing the lobby of a hotel and a set for Oklahoma. But the principles of design, good design is good design and bad design is bad. And so I spent a lot of time with those people. I spent a lot of time with some of the hand design, in other words, weaving and sculpture, both of which I would have liked to pursue, but I never had time to get back to them, so to speak. And then I did as many drawing classes as I could. I was the bête noire of most of my teachers, but
that as well is not an unusual unusual thing for theater designers as well. Yeah. Especially when they're trying to get their own training together independent of some sort of larger structure. And then tell me about James Rainey's play. So from what, and you'll have to forgive me because I'm really ignorant of this kind of part of history, we tend to, on the podcast in the past, we've spoken about this sort of rise in telling Canadian stories professionally and being like this was the purpose of Canadian theatre.
Well, I'm not sure that it was the purpose. I mean, I think it may have been in the minds of the writers and certainly some of the audience, but I think it was just the time had come to establish a theater in this country. But I mean, that aspect of it is true because I remember a very good friend of mine who was a drama critic saying to me once, and he'd been living in England for many years and working, and he came back to Canada and he said, Canadian plays are it's like a postcard collection. This play is telling you what it's like in Newfoundland, and this play is telling you what it's like in the slums of Winnipeg. And so that is, to a certain extent, that's true. Yeah.
And it sounds like the Dominion Drama Festival was an important player in sort of getting
it was very important.
Can you tell me about how you feel it sort of fed into that?
I think the theater performance is as old as practically humanity. And even small communities in Canada often had a very active and very good drama group. And so that what happened, and they always brought an outside adjudicator in, so there would be no, I'm from Edmonton, so the play from Edmonton better win kind of thing. So that I think the judging of the work at the Drama Festival was very sort of honest and straightforward. And a lot of people who, came up, as I say, I keep mentioning John Colicos, Al Koslick, who was at Shaw for years, Ron Hartman, who had won Best Actor prizes at the DDF, the Dominion Drama Festival, then went on to hitch their wagon to either the beginnings of theatre in Canada or most of them went to England. But a lot of them did come back here and be the backbone of the early days of Canadian theatre.
And it's interesting that in a time, like we still have discussions about the the popular acceptance of design as a part of theater.
Yeah.
And people understand it. It's not really talked about in lay culture a lot. And yet at the time here, we're talking about the early 60s, there's awards for design in these plays. And so it was still something that was very important, obviously, to the people who were organizing it. How much... what was the sophistication level of the design that was being done at that time?
It was wildly varied.
Yeah.
I mean, if you go back to and I can't speak really outside of not even Ontario, just Toronto, but there was the Arts and Letters Club, and there were a lot of, as I said, very strong amateur groups, and some of them had artists who liked to design sets and space and backdrops. I mean, in the archives of Hart House Theatre, there's a little tiny 1/4-inch maquette of a set. Nobody knows the name of the play because it's not on. That was designed by Lauren Harris, for heaven's sakes. I thought Steve Martin should have a look at it when he comes to town. But so you always had, a number of graphic artists and a number of painters in any community around to, look at and figure out sort of what stage design was about. But it was very much an amateur activity. But, again, you have to remember that there were some very good theatre magazines available, and I suspect that if you lived in Flin Flon, Manitoba, you probably, looked at a picture and said, oh, well, this is what this is supposed to look like. And because the interesting thing we found doing the chapter on amateur theatre was that you look at the program, and of course everybody in the community who worked on it has to be in the program. Yes. But, you would look at the set crew and there would be 15 guys on it, and it turned out that so-and-so was the dentist and he was the best carpenter. And the same with the costumes. And there was always somebody who would paint well enough to do, whatever. And some of the work, I think, was probably very good. Some of it was probably equally very dreadful. And, but dreadful out of ignorance rather than lack of talent.
Sure, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
And what did it take? First of all, what was the contrast with the professional the theater that was going on in Canada at that time? We had Stratford had started in the late 50s, right? COC was producing.
Yeah.
We had obviously touring productions from the US and the UK probably coming through. How did that contrast? What was the sort of public perception of the community versus the professional theater?
Well, I think what happened was, as I'm sure you do know, is that the community theater took a real nosedive, and then I gather has now totally rebuilt itself. I mean, there's a drama group in practically every town in Ontario, and the drama festival has emerged in a much simpler form. And I can't speak about what it is because I don't know, but. The perception was that I think it was a degree, too, of sophistication that suddenly you could, in Toronto, there'd always been this huge audience for the American touring production. And so Toronto isn't probably the best place to actually start talking about. And but a lot of people who had been interested in a community theater, at least interested in theater design and making things and building things at a community level, managed to get themselves hired by these new burgeoning organizations. And that's really where it started. Now, the COC was always slightly different. Geiger Terrell was, because it was called the Canadian Opera Company, and he was a German via Argentina, but he was very keen that it be Canadian, and he used a lot of the younger Canadian designers at the CBC, and managed to find people like Suzanne Mess and Les Lawrence and that generation who are just a little bit older than I am, to make it all work. Now, the sets weren't very sophisticated, but they were on the stage eventually at the Royal Alexandra Theatre, and they were, I remember some of them being pretty good.
That's great. Just before we get more into the specifics of your career coming out of OCA, what was your perception of the transition away from the amateur tradition amateur tradition into what was really a blossoming of the funding of the arts in Canada in the late 60s.
Well, I think the community theatre, let's leave radio actors out of this, but I think the people in the community theatre always had another job. I mean, it was their hobby, but they were pretty talented at their hobby, so to speak. And as I said, I think it did take a nosedive in terms of audience and also interest, but it's something that people enjoy doing, even if they're not very good at it. And I think that its revival in the last 10 years speaks to that.
Yeah, that's true. Also to the need to have that kind of expression as well, I think, and form community through that kind of shared theatrical experience. All right, so you leave OCA, you go down to London.
Yeah.
How many seasons were you you were the resident designer? Yeah. And how many seasons were you there?
I was there for 3 years.
Right. And what did they produce?
They produced everything. From very mainstream American and Broadway and West End London type plays. They produced a full-scale musical every year. I mean, the first year I was there, Victor Braun, who was from London, was paid the vast sum of $1,000 because there was nobody who could sing it locally except Victor. Anyway, the vast sum of $1,000 to come back and sing Emile de Becque in South Pacific. And I remember it being, it was the first thing I didn't work on it because that was before my show was the second one and it was the opener. But I went to see it and I remember it being pretty good. Yeah, sure. You know, I mean, there were people who could actually dance. There were certainly people who could sing besides Victor. And, it was amazing. They also tried to they did 8 shows a year in the big theater, the Grand. And they tried to do 2 others elsewhere that were, avant-garde or really kind of off the map. And then 2 less avant-garde productions in the big theater. And of course, the attendance at them dropped considerably. I mean, it was not a particularly sophisticated audience, and they were our theater knowledge was very limited in those days. We just didn't know about these plays. I mean, I remember the year we did Marat Sade. There was practically people picketing outside the theater. But that was all part of the development of the Canadian theater,
Were there any plays being written specifically for them, like were local playwrights or Canadian playwrights?
Well, there had been Mrs. Brickenden, who was a great mover and shaker and also a financial supporter of the London Little Theatre, one of the founders, had written some one-act plays, which I gather I've only read a few of them for my research for the chapter in the book, but they were quite good, and I gather they did get performed. If not on the main bill at the Grand, then, on a Saturday matinee or some peripheral event. But James Rainey was not from London, but he was from that area. And the reason that the Alumni Theatre did the Killdeer was because he was a great friend of one of their members. And she sort of came to a play reading meeting and said, this is a kind of interesting play. He's a Canadian and we should be doing it. And we did. And,
what was your first, what did you design first? Do you remember what you first did there?
Oh my God. I wish I'd known you to ask this question. Isn't that awful? The years kind of get mixed up. I don't forget specific shows. The thing I think I designed first, and I may be giving you misinformation, I think was Life with Father. Right. And I did both the set and the clothes for that.
And what was your experience? You had obviously designed stuff before, but that was the first time.
It was very limited,
space.
But I did know what was supposed to happen and how particularly costumes worked. And people always say, oh, but it's so much more difficult to design serious plays than it is to design. Life with Father, let me tell you, was a nightmare to design. I've always said to people that I know exactly what hell is like. It's a continual performance of Life with Father. Because you've got the dog, the budgie, 3 complete meals to cook, and a set and costumes to deal with. Anyway, that may be wrong, and if it is, I may think what it was till the end of this interview.
Oh, that's fine.
And you can correct it.
Yeah, feel free to
But
interject.
I think that was it. And the way it worked was that there were 8 productions a year, which all ran for 10. They did 10 performances except the musical, which they did 12. And 6 of them were designed by the resident designer. Of course, while I was there, that was me. And then the other 2 were designed by local people, usually the designer from the television station or some local artist or something. And the director was very clever in always trying to pair the non-scenic designer, but the artist, with a play that, they would work and it would. Right. Yeah.
That's great. And what was your now at this point you were committed to working in theater? Was it still a lark, or was this something that you were like, no,
I
this
was firmly committed to this. Absolutely.
And when did you realize? Was there a moment you realized that you were going to make it, or was it at all a struggle? Or
well, there wasn't much. There wasn't a lot of competition. Except the people at the CBC, and so that there, if there was work going, I didn't mean that I got it all the time, but I did get a fair amount of work. I did, some shows at the Crest, and there were independent productions that I remember doing. The first YPT show, for instance, which happened in the Museum Theatre, and was a script by a Canadian actor whose name I now can't remember, of Alice in Wonderland. So there was a lot of stuff going around. And then after I married, I had 2 children very quickly, and there was a kind of hiatus. But I did manage to try and do, at least 2 shows a year. And a lot of those one year, both shows were at the Crest.
And just before we talk about the Crest, let's talk about your time at CBC. How did you get?
No, I never worked.
You never worked at the CBC. Oh, I'm so sorry.
I applied once for a job in the wardrobe in the costume design department, and Hillary Corbett got the job. Right. And that was then I thought, no, I don't want to do that. Yeah, exactly. I was more interested in live production, theater.
All right. Well, let's talk about. Tell me about the Crest. Then I've heard of the Crest. Yeah. I don't know much about it. So. Tell me about what are, especially for people who have never heard of it, what it was and.
Well, it was a family called the Davises, Murray and his brother Donald and their sister Barbara, came from a very wealthy family in Toronto, and they'd been the 2 brothers had been very successful actors at the University of Toronto and had started a summer theater, the Straw Hat Players, close to their family summer home. And they, used, as I said, people they'd been at university with, or again, well-known radio actors. And I don't know how many seasons of the Straw Hat Players there were before they rented movie theater on Mount Pleasant Avenue, which had a stage in it, because it had been a sort of pseudo-vaudeville theater, and started doing a season of plays. They ran for, it was very like summer stock, they ran for two weeks each. And did an incredible variety of work. I mean, they did not a lot, but they did some Canadian plays. They did a lot of new English plays, which were causing a sort of worldwide literary sensation. And they did a lot of golden oldies as well. And it was very successful for a number of years. And then I think all theaters except, possibly the National Theatre in Britain and the Royal Shakespeare and Stratford and Shaw. They run their course, and I think that's what happened with the Crest. And they've been replaced in a strange way, run very differently in a very different sort of ethos of how they work. But Soul Pepper is, now like the early days of the Crest. Albert might not like to hear me say that, but it's true. I mean, they do a huge, Soul Pepper does a huge mixture and variety of things. They're bolder and do a larger variety than the Crest did, but you also have to build an audience,
That's true.
And
what years was this operating? Just so we have context.
Let's see, I would say probably 1955. No, earlier than that, probably 52 or 53. And when they closed, I wouldn't be prepared to say. It was certainly well into the 60s. I mean, I think it had about a 10-year run.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense. That's great. And so after you left London, you moved back to Toronto?
We moved back to Toronto, and as I said, a lot of time was devoted to having two babies, more or less at the same time. And then I again this was a hard choice to make. I was offered the job at Hart House Theatre as head of design, and I knew that this was going to, in many ways, close me off from certain other theatres because I wouldn't be able to get away. I mean, I would either have to do the job at the university or I would have to continue to work freelance. And after a really hard-fought decision with myself and my family, I took the job at Hart House because for a lot of reasons. I mean, they were doing very interesting things. They had quite interesting budgets to work with. They weren't huge, but they weren't 50 cents for the whole thing. And I was there for a number of years, many years, until I basically academically retired. And then, when I first went there, we did 4 shows a year in Hart House because it was a part of subscription. And then the students did shows in the theater, the old Russian Orthodox Church on Glen Morris Street, and that number varied. And I designed very few of those because the purpose of it was to be a student theater. And then when the University of Toronto bought the old Central Library building, there was a theater just sitting there waiting. So we moved out of Hart House and did only 6 productions at the Robert Gill Theatre. And it continues more or less the same until this day. The student audience, again, took a huge nosedive in the 70s. And now, the last couple of things I've seen there have not only been very good, but they've been practically sold out. So there is now an audience on the campus. It's come back to that. Excuse me.
Certainly.
Which is a good thing, but as you know, even if you're not lighting things, there are now theaters springing up all over the place. I mean, a theater above a cigar store or whatever it is, and down in a pizza place, I think, on the Danforth. And, I look at the entertainment page now, and I have to figure out where on earth the XYZ or whatever it's called theater actually is. And it turns out to be in the basement of a garage on Alcorn Avenue or somewhere, But, and I think that's a very healthy thing. And then, of course, the huge thing we were talking about, design, was not only the theater school, but now there are I think probably, if we examined it, too many. But I'm not sure about that. Theater training programs in colleges and universities right across the country. And what that means is that a lot of people, go through the program and only the cream rises to the top. For various, reasons. People change their minds or whatever.
Absolutely. Let's just go back to the Hart House for a second. So who were you working with there? Who was there? Was there an artistic director?
Yes. Well, I worked there as a student at when I was at the art college for Robert Gill. I did 2 shows for him, and then
And just I'm going to interrupt you. What was it like working with him? Because I don't know a lot about him.
well, he was a genius in many ways. He knew exactly what he was dealing with and what he was doing, and he had a real eye for spotting talent. I mean, he seemed to be able to tell in the first 10 minutes whether somebody could act or not. And he was very encouraging of designers. Now, there weren't a lot of people. I mean, he occasionally used people who were in the fine art department. And me, I was thinking how it actually worked. I met him and was talking about design. I met him socially and was talking about design. And about 1.5 years later, he must have remembered who I was, or somebody told him, or something, because I was still at the art college. And he asked me to design a play of Shaw's, which nobody ever does, called The Simpleton of the Unexpected Islands. And then the next year I designed something else for him while he was there. And then they tried to make it into a professional theater, and that didn't work at all. There were 2 or 3 seasons of 2, I guess, yes, of that. And then it went into serious decline because the Drama Center, as a student theater, it went into serious decline. Then the Drama Center was able to kind of bring it back up to a certain degree, but they had always had a great deal of difficulty getting a student audience, mainly because sometimes the choice of material was unheard of. I mean, people aren't going to plonk down that kind of money for something they know nothing about. So the mix of things they do now is, I really think, is what's brought it back, is that, they do a musical every year. And so you go and see that, and then you think, well, that wasn't too bad, so I'll go and see something else. And, they haven't brought the subscription up like in the days of Robert Gill, but it's coming back. And, it's a very difficult theater to work in. Physically. But that doesn't seem to stop anybody, and I'm really glad to see that. Where I think, this is a complete sidebar, where I think OCA really missed the boat was not instituting a state program in stage design. I don't know whether that was a conscious decision or whether the horse just walked too fast by, but for some crazy reason, the training of design, theater design, has fallen mostly to the universities.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I always found that kind of strange as well.
Yeah.
It didn't have those programs.
Yeah, well, you see, if you read biographies of, for instance, most French-Canadian designers of, the late, great Francois Barbeau and people, they all went to l'École des Beaux-Arts, which is like an art school. It's not a university. Yeah.
Which in many ways is, it seems like what's missing at the university level. There seems to be, for example, I went to Ryerson Theatre School, and I think that the same thing happened at York, where we really had there was so much else that they wanted to teach you that you really couldn't sit there and just think about design and about art history and about the designer as an artist as opposed to as a technician.
Yes.
It feels like that's missing somehow.
Yeah, well, it's always seemed to me extremely peculiar that the exhibitions that there have been on stage, designed for the theater, because, there are now ways that you can actually display sound and lighting, have never happened at an art gallery. Yeah. I think that's disgraceful. Yeah. That there is so much theater in Ontario. Just because there are a couple of big cities, but the art gallery has never had a national exhibition of stage design.
Yeah, it's been kind of.
But they'll have David Bowie's clothes.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
Which I didn't. They're wonderful costumes, but it didn't quite strike me as being totally connected to art in the way we understand it. And I think that's part of the problem, is that stage and costume design and lighting design and sound, they are arts. Yeah. And the lighting and sound are fairly new theater arts, but
And video for that matter.
and
as
video,
well, yeah.
whatever.
Now, do you think that maybe there was a bit of a bias against it because of the amateur nature?
Yes,
of
I do.
theater?
You were going to take the words right out of my mouth. That it was something that you did for a hobby. And I think that the people who were teaching at OCA at the time were practically 100% members of the Arts and Letters Club. And their hobby was that, they would come and paint the backdrop or build some furniture for the tour, because the Arts and Letters Club used to have a very active theater. And if you look at the names of the people who did it, you might go, oh my God, this is practically the history of Canadian art. But I think there was a huge bias that it was a thing you did for your hobby. It wasn't real. And I think also it was a lack of sophistication. I mean, I think art schools were being run by artists and not necessarily interested in the theater and not interested in, who some really of the great theater designers working at the time were, I mean, I always used to say this when I was a student. I think if you'd stopped 10 instructors at OCA who were wonderful teachers and said, tell me what you know about Joe Malziner, they would have looked at you blankly and said, well, does he go to the school?
Right, yeah, exactly.
And so, as I said, I think that's a very important and pertinent part, that it was prejudice.
And speaking of prejudice, let's talk about being a woman in the arts in the 1960s. Did you feel like this was an easy opportunity for you, or did you have to fight a little bit to get people?
People always ask
convinced?
Suzanne and other people more or less my age this question. And there was a bit of a bias that girls should only do clothes. But I can't think, except possibly one instance where I didn't even get a sensible interview because they were going to have a man as their resident designer. So I can't say that I was ever very aware of, a great prejudice against women designers. And I mean, yourself now, if you look at the big theaters, 99% of stage managers are now women. I mean, it's just the weirdest thing. That wasn't conscious on anybody's part. It just kind of morphed into, and I mean, the last summer, or was it the summer before? Anyway, I looked at the Stratford program and realized that the entire stage management team, except for Brian, what's his name, were women, And and then that's interesting. And I think it's very much happened. I mean, I think also big names designing on Broadway and in the West End had a lot to do with it, too. I mean, the great revolutionary Jean Rosenthal, lighting Broadway shows, very quickly changed people's perceptions of that. Yeah, absolutely. And they thought, well, if she can do lighting, that's, after all, guys and lights and things like that, maybe women can do it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, and she invented that term, lighting designer,
yes,
really
she
as
did.
well, right?
Really.
So that's incredible. That's great. Now, you, coming out of the 60s, so we had this birth of sort of Canadian theaters at the end of the 60s, right? And the start of the Factory and the Tarragon, at least in Toronto.
Yeah.
And a rise of things like Theatre Calgary and Playhouse, I think, in Vancouver is late 60s, early 70s. I could be wrong about that. But where did you find yourself fitting into that kind of rebirth? I mean, really came out of a lot of hippie culture
because
and stuff
at
that too, right?
time, as I said, I was still semi-retired with children. And I did some stuff, as I said, I did some stuff at the end of the Crest. I did, some independent stuff. But I didn't, also there were the first graduates of the theater school emerging at that time. And I'm not saying that, they were better or anything than I was, but they were just getting a lot of the jobs. And also they'd work cheaper, if you really want the honest truth. And I'd started to do film at that point. Yeah. I mean, not in the very, very early days of alternate theatre in Toronto, but pretty quickly into that. And I mean, if you're doing film, you're doing that for 48 hours in a single day. And there was no time to do anything else. And also, I started working with Leon Major a lot in doing opera south of the border.
Right. Okay. So that's great. So tell me about your entrance into film. How did you get your first break, and how did you find your way? Because the two communities are really separate. Right?
They're totally different. Yeah. I knew nothing about film. Kevin Sullivan had been a student at the university when I first went there, and he was obviously a mover and shaker. I suspect when he was 3 years old, but when I knew him, he was more like 19. And he had done a small film. He was always interested in film, not the theater. And he had done a small film of this Hans Christian Andersen story, The Fir Tree, at Pioneer Village. And he didn't know anybody who knew anything about costumes, and he didn't know anything about costumes. So he said, there's only 4 people in this or something. There were 5, I think. Will you do it? Right. And I did, but it was basically, I just found the costumes, fitted them, and the set was Pioneer Village, so I didn't have to do any of that. Right. And off they went. And then he did, what was next? I guess the film about Krieghoff was next, which I did. And I had a very good assistant who had had some film experience because she had been to a film program, I think, at Calgary. And then he did...
So that was the Canadian...
That was a Canadian film.
Yeah.
It wasn't a feature. It's a short hour-long drama about Krieghoff the painter.
The painter, yeah.
And then after that, what did he do? Can't remember. It's irrelevant. And then I read literally in the paper that he had got the rights to do this film of Anne of Green Gables and was proceeding ahead. So I phoned him. That literally, I got up from the dinner table practically and phoned him. And because he knew I knew what I was doing about clothes, excuse me, he hired me. And it was as you know, an incredible success. Yeah. And you only need one success like that before you get to be, if not the flavor of the month, at least the flavor of the day or the week. And but as you also probably know, film for me is a young person's job. I mean, it's physically hard work, particularly if you're doing a lot of exterior stuff. And I just, again, the band hasn't passed by. I just really didn't want to do it anymore. The last Anne of Green Gables, the prequel, which I loved doing, but it was hard work, and I just said, you're too old for this. And somebody said to me, after I, said basically, I don't think I'm going to do film anymore, but Anne Roth is 90, and she was 88 at the time, still doing movies. I said, I could do it if I had 6 assistants too, but I don't have 6 assistants, and I don't have, 4 Oscars and 20 Tonys to my name. So nobody is going to give me 6 assistants. Yeah. I mean, I would still love to be doing a show in the theater if it wasn't too huge. But we'll just see if it comes along. It may not ever come again, and you just have to accept that. Yeah.
I understand. And now tell me about the opera that you did south of the border. So what were you working on?
Well, again, I'd worked with Leon here in Toronto. We were friends as well as workmates. And he asked me to do something for him, and I did 2 things at Glimmerglass, and then the artistic director of Glimmerglass became the artistic director of the New York City Opera, which is now defunct, unfortunately. And I did, a couple of things there. And then I did some other things that were not, by that time I'd got a little bit of a reputation. And I think I worked for The Price is Right. And so I did some independent stuff not for Leon. I did a thing for Miami Opera and several other places. And, I mean, that was wonderful,
Any favorite productions from that time that you think that was a real success for you? And
Oh, it was the show at Glimmerglass. I mean, I tell you, because it's one of my favorite stories. When it came to City Opera in New York, it was one of those days in the world where nothing happens. I mean, nobody was shot, nobody blew up, there were no floods. And Lauren Flanagan, who was singing the lead, was a great favorite of New York City Opera. And the review ended up on the front page because it was the most interesting thing that happened that day in New York. I mean, it is, after all, called the New York Times. And the review, I can't remember the exact wording, but it said something like to the effect, if it was admiring the looks of the man who'd played the lead, the male lead, and said, if we could all just have costumes by Martha Mann, maybe we'd all look like that. It was, quite a surprise. I got a lot of phone calls from friends in other places saying, have you seen today's Times? So, but that kind of thing comes, it was a fluke, because if there'd been a presidential assassination in, some African country, the review would have been buried inside the paper, but...
That's great.
So that was a kind of high that...
And how did you feel, like you had been working in, up until that point, you did some film at that point, but a lot of your theater experience had been in Toronto and London. And how did you manage the transition to working in New York and with those artists?
Basically, it's the same. A costume is a costume. I was only doing clothes. I never did a set because I'm not a member of United Scenic Artists. But making clothes is making clothes, there was so much more to choose from and so much more talent that I was suddenly working with. You'd go into, I can't even remember what they were called, but one of the well-known costume shops in New York, but it was very small because they'd only ever done men's clothes. Right. And it was run by three sisters. I'm not making this up, who, when I was doing the things we were doing a remount at New York City Opera, and so we had to make quite a lot of new clothes anyway. So you went up 2 flights of stairs to their atelier, and they really did look like, the opening scene from Macbeth. I'm not kidding. They were in their 80s. And, we sat down, we showed them drawings, I talked to them, they asked questions of a great deal of sense, and then they went off on a riff about, when we used to make costumes for X, Y, and Z. And you realize that this was the history of the American theater. It was in this room, amazing. And but as I said, good costume makers are good costume makers. What I wasn't used to was that, of course, in a Broadway-type house, even in New York City Opera, they don't have they have a wardrobe, but it's basically just for alterations. If, so some, like, the men's suits were made by the 3 old ladies, a lot of them. The women's clothes, the leads were made by another person, another person was made, so that...
It's a lot of running around.
It was a lot of running around, which I wasn't used to.
Right.
But on the other hand, you go to the button store, and there's like a wall of buttons, twice the size of this room, and you go, oh my God, I've got to choose something. So, but yes, it was a wonderful experience, which I wouldn't have missed for anything.
And what was the name of the show? I think we missed that.
It was called... oh my God, Intermezzo.
Intermezzo, okay.
It's a late opera of Richard Strauss's, which nobody ever does because it's scenically very difficult, and costumes are a nightmare. Because most of it takes place at a ski resort in the Alps. And so, and again, that's another anecdote about how word spreads. I got a phone call after I got home. 3 days after it opened from somebody in New York, because I did the readout on the phone and realized they were in New York. Who on earth was this? And it was the head of the wardrobe at Radio City Music Hall. And he had seen Intermezzo and read the program because there was so much knitting. I mean, there were like sweaters, hats, mitts, socks, everything, because they're skiing. Right. And he said, and it was just a name, you know, and who is he? And how can I get in touch with him? And so a friend of mine here who did all the knitting ended up doing 48 or whatever however many of them there are, identical frocks for the Rockettes, who are doing a ski and skating number for Christmas.
Right. Yeah, now we have sort of knitting machines and things like that.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Well, most of this was machine knit, but you still got to do them for Radio City Music Hall, which was kind of fun.
That's awesome. A lot of the theme, or a lot of things. One of the things we've been talking about a lot about. Oh my God, let me start again. One of the things we've been talking about a lot on the podcast is about the precariousness of artisanal memory in Canadian theatre, and how we're kind of losing, as the generation that was trained in the 50s and 60s and 70s is getting older, we're kind of losing a lot of talent.
Well, I think we're losing a lot of history, too, is that, as I said, I don't know whether you know, but R.H. Thompson was doing a program, or doing a project of trying to interview all sorts of different variety. I mean, everybody from actors to practically, you know, the lady who sold the tickets for the Canadian Theatre Museum. And I don't know whether that program is gone nowhere or whether it's still happening and nobody wants to talk to me. But no, I do think that this is true. I mean, I think that an awful lot of, for instance, you know, in the 20s when Harthouse Theatre was a going concern and doing really the best, you know, the best native theatre it wasn't Canadian plays, but it was Canadian performers and everything. And as I said, nobody got to talk, nobody had the brains to talk to anybody. And when they realized they should be doing this, half the people were gone and the other half were 85. You know, it was just, and I think this is still happening, you know.
I agree.
I mean, I just think, you know, oral history, if that's the only way you can do it, is wonderful. I mean, I remember, it has nothing to do with the theatre at all, but being to a fabulous exhibition it was called Wartime Britain it's not National, it's the War Museum in London anyway, whatever it's called.
It's called the
Imperial War Museum, exactly. And it was just, you know, ration books and things. And then there was a whole section of oral history of, you know, like there were 6 wax and 6 something else. And then there were just a couple of interviews with ordinary housewives and the interview with the lady whose wedding dress was made out of a parachute. Right. And you thought, this is I mean, I thought, I'll press the button to play and listen to it for a minute. Yeah. Well, I listened to the whole thing because it was fabulous. Fabulous. I mean, the lady whose wedding dress was made out of the parachute said, yes, I will talk to you, but if you ask me where I got the parachute, you won't find out. So if that's your only interest, forget it.
That's right, yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, I completely agree. This is why we're doing this kind of recording, is because nobody's really, I mean, there was a book out of I'm going to forget the name, out of Queens, I think. There was a researcher there who gathered a bunch of 6 to 8 Canadian designers and sort of showcased their work in the book. And it captured, obviously, some important Canadian theatre history. But there's a lot that's going completely forgotten and missing.
And I think that's really a problem. I mean, there's all that material. There's a lot of material has, of course, been lost. But there's all that material at the Toronto Public Library. There's all that material at Guelph. And, university archives across the country have some stuff pertaining to, Canadian, both professional and amateur theatre. Yeah. And I just think people don't even know it's there. Yeah. So,
Yeah, that's true.
I just think it's a huge problem that we're just letting so much of the, we know so much. I mean, we know every time they took a breath about the group of seven, quite frankly.
That's right, yeah.
But something that is an ongoing process or has an ongoing process in this country, we're just letting huge gaps develop because we don't know anything about it.
Yeah, exactly. I know that one of the problems, I spoke with Pat Flood about this down at Guelph, is that a lot of the archives, blueprints and scripts and things like that can preserve, rather well. But things like maquettes, which are sometimes the only record of the actual, how all the pieces fit together in a design, take a lot of work to restore and to archive. And there's a combination, I think, of lack of funding and lack of interest in archivists.
And
to
also
do
with
that
the
work.
maquettes, it's lack of space.
Yeah, and then you have to store it.
Something as simple as lack of space.
Yeah, absolutely. Great.
But as I said, back to what I said, an hour ago, the fact that the Art Gallery of Ontario has not had an exhibit of designs for the theatre, even if it's restricted. Well, it can't be restricted because then you cut out Stratford. But, it just should be there. These are the theatres. These are the people who... And, let's face it, what made Stratford initially was what it looked like,
Yeah, that's true. All right, let's leave it there for a second. We'll take a break because we're an hour in.
Yeah.
And then we'll come back and talk about your theory of design, and we'll talk about your process and what you think is missing or should be added. So I'll just stop this. Hi there, I'm interrupting briefly to ask you once again to support the Title Block on patreon.com. Click on Support the Show in the show notes. This will bring you to my Patreon page where you can donate a small amount every episode. I'm just asking that you help to cover the cost and help me to continue to capture the story of Canadian theatre design. Go to patreon.com/the Title Block Podcast and donate a couple bucks an episode. It really helps. So when you were starting out in the early 60s, did you have any opportunity to assist or work with other designers to sort of learn as an apprentice? Or
No, there wasn't any such thing as apprenticing. If you were the costume designer, in some cases you were expected to make them as well as design them. I'm not making this up, you were. They thought that's what costume designers did, was really make clothes. And what I think the assistance that I had, not assisting other people, but was just watching people who had been doing it for longer than I had. Like the carpenter at the Crest, a wonderful man called Stan Turner, had worked at the Royal Opera House for many years. And just being in the same shop while he was building something was a lesson in itself. So that was the assistance I got, but I didn't ever properly assist anybody in the way we use assistants now.
And how about theater training at the time? You didn't. You went to OCA. What did you feel when you met designers or worked with them on productions that had come from those theater programs?
That nobody knew very much except the possible people who had been European trained in either film or theater. Knew much about how to do it either. So there wasn't. There was a certain feeling of groping around. There must be a way to do this, but I don't know what it is. And there was, if you talk to the designers my age or even 10 years younger, there was, as I said, a certain degree of there's got to be a way to do this, but we had to figure out for ourselves what it was. Yeah.
Was there much of a network of communications across the country to figure out those kind of problems?
No, because there was no internet, so you couldn't just press in and hope for some information to come up on a screen. Mm-hmm. And there really was no real communication except people traveling to, work in other cities. There was really no communication because there was so little theater outside big cities in those days. There just wasn't anybody to ask who knew more than you did. I mean, I remember phoning people like Lou Killig, who used to, again, had worked for years in costumes in England, and saying, do you know anybody who makes gloves or, whatever? And he did, but of course they were always in England, and in those days that was not, by the time you got it organized, the show had closed. Yeah. So that wasn't much help. But there were a lot of people in the technical end of it, strangely enough, who held the sort of positions at the CBC and at places like Malabar's and in the theaters that grew up that had worked in, the A places in Europe or in England. Right. And they were certainly around, and they knew how to do it, but they often didn't know anybody else who did, and there was nobody in Canada. I mean, the famous story of, the boots the first year at Stratford, somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody who had a cousin who knew somebody said, there is a guy on College Street who I think makes shoes. Right. Maybe we could find him. And they did, and he made shoes for years at Stratford. Right. But it was just happenstance.
Let's talk about some other highlights you occurred before we move on to sort of more structural questions. After you, coming into the 70s and 80s, so first of all, what was your film career? What was the arc of the film career? You did that up until only...
Yeah, the last thing I did was in 2008, I think.
So fairly recently. In the 70s and 80s then, where was the bulk of your work coming from? Were you freelancing all over the place?
I was freelancing, whoever would hire me.
Yeah. And what about, what were some... show highlights? What do you remember that was a really important show for you during that period of time, or do you? You can take a moment. You don't have to feel the pressure.
Well, I'm just thinking after the Anne of Green Gables, which certainly wasn't in the 60s, it was later than that, but after the success of the movie, I became the sort of Anne of Green Gables guru of Canada. I mean, not only did I get fan mail, which was a real surprise for a designer, but I also did the musical out at Theatre Calgary, which was a lot of fun because it's an entirely different thing. It's a musical. They sing and dance and do a lot of that sort of stuff. So that was great fun to do, and it was a highlight because I knew what I was doing, and it was basically we're not just recreating the movie, which is what, of course, the kids who came to see it were hoping to see, but we did most of the stuff was there. Yeah. So, and that was a huge highlight. And as I said, working at the New York City Opera was certainly a highlight. Yeah. And
And did you have any connection to the Charlottetown Festival? They're kind of known for the Anne of Green Gables kind of franchise out there. Right?
Well, no. I mean, they're still using the sets and costumes that are how many years old?
That's true, yeah.
Because they're fabulous. I mean, they're the crazy thing about those is, they're not using the same clothes. They're the same designs, more or less. Yeah. The crazy thing about those is that they went totally out of fashion, right. But then they've been using them so long that they came totally back into fashion again, right. And they're really quite wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, let's talk about some structural things then. When you had largely sort of to figure out your own process.
Yes, I was never a carpenter, and painting is painting. So that's not much to teach yourself. And I was never a great scenic artist, as I said, because I will freely admit I don't draw very well, but that doesn't mean I can't design. I just don't have a technical skill, which a lot of designers do. Somebody like Michael Egan in Montreal, his construction drawings are works of art. They should be on the stage, never mind the people. So as I said, I think that the things, and I did know something about sewing, but for instance, I was never a cutter, because that, again, is a very trained skill. So when I was actually making costumes, which was the first year I was at the Grand, And I was very young and very inexperienced. And I mean, I used to, work till 11 o'clock at night trying to figure out what to do next. And I didn't want a whole bunch of people standing around waiting to be told, because I thought, I am supposed to know what I'm doing. And 99% of the time it worked out. But, there is, but I think you're always doing that as an artist. I think you're always saying, I have this idea, or I have a thought about what's going to work here, but I am not sure how to do it. And I mean, as the theater becomes more and more technical, the designers of the various disciplines have to be more and more connected.
And how do you feel about the idea that the designer's vision is kind of mediated by the people who are implementing it? Like, do you rely? How much does that interaction change the design, or are you very specific about no, it has to be this way? And
It depends what it is. If somebody comes to me with a better idea, I will listen and say, well, yeah, it is a good idea, but we're not having it, or yeah, let's try it. But yes, I am very detail-oriented as a designer, because I think that's very important in what you're doing. And if I say it has to be, I mean, for instance, when I did, the last thing I did before I broke my leg and my hip at the same time, was doing the play about Glenn Gould at Soul Pepper. And one of the things it says in the script, because Glenn Gould actually had two of them in his apartment, that his section of the stage is basically an Eames chair. Now, Eames chairs are over $2,000. And I said to the prop people, I don't know what we're going to do here. Either Diane's going to have to cut the lines about the wretched chair, or we're going to have to, fake it or do something, because we certainly can't afford it. Well, lo and behold, onto the internet she goes, and she finds an Eames chair that unfortunately was somebody must have really maltreated, because they last forever, but the leather was cracked. And I said, there's got to be something else wrong with it. Nobody is selling an Eames chair for that amount of money if there's nothing else wrong with it. So it was it was further away than Newmarket. Anyway, it was somewhere north. And she went to see it, and that was all that was wrong with it, was that somebody was selling it because the leather, it needed to be reupholstered, in other words. So, we lucked out. And sometimes you do and sometimes you don't.
I'm not a costume designer. I've never designed costumes, and I don't.
Didn't you have to make a shirt at Ryerson? Everybody made a shirt at Ryerson.
Jean Charles Black made me make a shirt with mutton sleeves, and it was a terrible experience. Especially since my model, I had, God bless him, John Hughesman. I think he's still working in. He works in the live entertainment. The rock and roll trade show.
Yeah, I
kind
think
of market,
he's still
right?
working in those.
And he was my model, and so he's about 6.5 feet tall, and he's a really big guy. So he's not like the normal. He's not sort of the paragon of sort of the average man. And I had to make this giant jacket for him, which was I had never sewed before. It was experience that was.
You could write a book about guys making their shirt at Ryerson.
It's true. It's very true. I ended up taking costume history there because it was something that I felt was really important, and I really enjoyed learning about the shapes and stuff. But I don't have an intuition about costumes, about how the body takes fabric and how things are put together. So I've never done that. But when you are did you learn that? You must have had to learn that more or less intuitively, because did you have that opportunity at OCA?
I did. I was always interested in clothes. I was not particularly interested in sewing. And there was really basically one costume history book. When I went to OCA, we had 2 books on costume history. Now there's a whole section on costume history. So there wasn't much interest in it. And I had the 2 books. I owned them, and, said, okay, that's the shape it's supposed to be, but there's no measurements on it. But at least I've got something to go on. And I certainly, I mean, there wasn't any total disasters, but I certainly, as I said, lots of nights I was there till 11:30 saying, well, this isn't quite right, but there's got to be something else you do. And you just figure it out. Now, again, a really good cutter, I think, has an intuitive, they have a secret computer in their brain that says this is how the body works, and this is how fabric and the body work together, and they do it. I mean, I mean, when I first went to Stratford and watched a couple of their, well, one legendary cutter, I mean, she would just put the fabric on the table, take out a ruler and a piece of chalk, and the next day you'd come in and there'd be this fabulous dress on the mannequin, you know. And it's just, I think it truly is an intuitive skill. I mean, it could, or of course, can be taught like anything can, but I think if you're really brilliant at it, it's an intuitive skill.
Yeah, absolutely. You kind of have to get beyond the rules and understand it on a deeper level. And how about the shows that you worked on? Was there a lot of opportunity to build from the ground up, or was there a lot of buying? Or
Yes, a lot of opportunity in the theater, not so much in film. I mean, that was, I think, what was fun, to do the musical of Anne of Green Gables, because we literally made everything. I mean, under the bloomers for the dancers and everything. And you don't get to do that in film. I mean, they were rented, or the principal's clothes were made, but you're counting on renting a huge chunk of the stuff, even for the principals. I mean, if you've done a lot of business with some of the costume houses in England, it's very funny when you go to the movie and you say, oh my God, that looked an awful lot better on X than it does on you. Because you have, and television's the same, English television, you've seen the clothes and you say, oh my dear, there it is again.
And how about your process of communicating what you want to to your cutters and to your wardrobe staff?
Well, as I said, my drawing is not beautiful, but it's very explicit, and I know exactly what I want. And I think it's just a question and answer in both directions. You know, do you want the cuffs to actually close, or do you know, are they just buttoned, or do you want? And so there's always a lot of technical stuff. And then particularly in the theater, there is a lot of technical information about what they're going to do in these clothes. And I mean, that's the nightmare when, you know, somebody tells you 2 days before it opens, so didn't anybody tell you that there was a quick change here? You know, and if you're doing something that's slightly experimental, it's both you and the cutter. I mean, I, for instance, with the Julius Caesar, I had this idea about about armor, and I'd never seen it or I'd never made it, but I was sure you could do it, which was to make it like, it was all leather, and it was to make it like a quilt. It's called trapunto quilting, where the top is bigger than the bottom piece, and you stuff it so that you get very three-dimensional. So we made at least 2, if not 3, fronts out of, you know, leather scraps and junk at Stratford, so we weren't wasting money, to make sure that this was a good idea. And then once we'd figured it out, you know, they just churned out a whole army of Roman soldiers. That's right. And
was there? I imagine at Stratford there's a lot more opportunity to do that kind of experimentation. In
there is,
theater,
but like every art in the world now, money is getting shorter and shorter. And I mean, I find Stratford, which I think is a good thing, on lesser characters using costumes that they do minor alterations to, but basically, because rather than, why are they just sitting in a warehouse hanging up? Yeah. You might as well do something with them. And I think that that's a good thing to do. And then other costumes, you know, I mean, I've seen things at Stratford in the last couple of years that were very experimental and weren't entirely successful. I mean, they were an interesting design idea, but you thought, no, we haven't quite invented the plastic to do this yet, or, you know, some other reason. And every new product that comes on the market, you can I mean, all the things that costumes used to be made out of, when I first started in this business, I mean, they don't even make them anymore because they're either carcinogenic or they're just been supplanted by something much, much better to use.
Can you give us an example?
Well, yes, we used to line anything that needed some stiffness with felt.
Right.
Well, now, you don't do that because A, it's hot, B, it doesn't launder, and B, it's just nasty. Now, you still there's still uses for it, but it's not that everything you make has to have 6 layers of lining in it.
Right. I remember when I was working at Blythe, we did a show that was taking place on the East Coast. And Jerry Franken had to wear a boiled wool sweater for the whole production, and he was, because he's supposed to be on the coast and in the ship, and it's really cold, and you're in this giant summer theater, which was extremely hot already, and he's wearing this giant boiled wool sweater. It's the bane of his existence for the entire run of the show. He hated it. But I guess now there's more. I mean, that was what was somebody had donated it or was in stock, or we found something that looked right.
Yeah.
But I
remember years ago, I can't say, I'll run up and bring it down to show you, but there was because I don't know where it is, but I saved it, a hysterical article in the magazine Opera News about costumes I have worn, and they were interviewing really top-of-the-line voices, like Placido Domingo and people. It wasn't somebody in the chorus. And they had found either the whole costume or bits of it, and they were photographed in it. And the gimmick was that they all made terrible faces. And it was a very serious article about, saying that they were asked to, do something, and the clothes just made it impossible. And then what do? Well, you have to figure out what you're going to do and do it, because that's the problem with people who reproduce historic clothes totally accurately. This is a play. This isn't a museum.
Yeah, exactly.
And what can you do?
Yeah, in much the same way as you don't build the back of the house backstage. You don't have to show the exact corset or the understructure that makes it so uncomfortable from 300 years ago. That's great. And as well, I think it's really interesting to talk about the perspective that you have, that of the theater, how it's changed in the past 40 years, and not just in generally, but from your corner of the world in theater.
I think my corner of the world, I think, is exactly the same as everybody else who's in the design fields. Corner. Sorry.
No, you don't have to move.
I'm sorry. Corner of the world is that we are much more experimental. We're using much more interesting materials, and the basic thing for me is that design on the stage has to tell a story. And if the story's not right, somehow the experiment hasn't worked. If you go and and I've seen many plays like this, you sit there and you go, what is this supposed to be? I won't name names because that's not what we're doing, but the play has to tell a story. And I think that realism still can conjure up on the stage. It can be quite wonderful. Sometimes total realism, this isn't a movie, it's a play, it doesn't have to look quite like this, can also, but the story it's telling has to communicate itself just as much as the actors do to the audience. And that's why I know that a lot of people hate plays with no curtains. But as a designer, I always like that because then I get a chance to sit before it starts and look at the set. Whereas usually, if the play is good enough, you're not paying much attention to the set. And you don't get to see it. So, and I think I think Peter Brook, as much as anybody, did everything to change that, said that, 4 feathers and a red nose from the dollar store, and you can do a brilliant Midsummer Night's Dream, and suddenly, but I think sometimes people get ideas that they will never work, and unfortunately they get themselves onto the stage, and they never work and they never will work, because the story is become so incomprehensible by what's going on that the poor actor is just fighting the whole time with what's around him and what he's wearing or she is wearing.
And we had spoken briefly the first time, or I think the only time that I've been that I'd met you before is during the process of. We're going to talk. Let's talk about. Let's start it back up for a second and talk about the ADC.
Yeah.
Because I've spoken to a couple people about the start of the ADC and its purpose and the feeling. The reason why it arose. This is the Associated Designers of Canada, and we've. It's been a little while since I've actually spoken about that with somebody. So I want maybe if you could give us your take on where that came from, why it was felt it was a necessity, what it was trying to accomplish.
Well, there were beginning to be a few independent films. There were beginning to be a few theater productions that were native born. And there was no way to control any of it. There was no contract. There was no idea of what people should be reimbursed for their efforts. There was no idea of anything to do with design and safety and all the things that go on around design and in theaters. And as I said, it was primarily people at the CBC who were beginning to do theater stuff as well and realized that they needed some kind of protection and some kind of controlling body. Right. And I don't know how many people, I think it was a lot of, person A talked to person B. And eventually they realized that person M was talking about exactly the same thing and maybe they should try and get a group. And I know that the first official meeting of ADC I was not at, but the second one, somebody phoned me. It was probably Les Lawrence, but I don't remember who, phoned me and said, there's a meeting of designers on Tuesday night next month. Can you come? And so I thought, well, yes, why not? So along I went. And I mean, it took, I think just the fact that it took so long to get a sensible contract in place for design, demonstrates how little real interest and knowledge, but mostly interest there was in this country in promoting design. I mean, the idea was that you would be paid the smallest amount of money you would possibly be persuaded to accept to do this. And there was nothing else built into it, I mean, for instance, Actors' Equity had a hard time getting built into their contract that what touched your body in a costume had to be cleaned every day, or washed, underwear and stuff, and the costume had to be cleaned on a weekly, monthly basis, whatever the designer said. And that was a huge battle with Equity. I can remember because my husband has been a member of Equity for years, and I used to read this with fascination that there would actually be managements in New York who were arguing with Equity about cleanliness. Right. And this isn't in the Dark Ages. This is in the 1960s. Yeah. So it's been the evolution of the theater in the last, I guess, really now we can say the last century in terms of simply protection and, the things that make it a real job, I guess, have come into being.
It does strike me, since we've been talking, we talked earlier about the amateur theater and the birth of Canadian theater from that tradition. It doesn't seem surprising that is a take that producers would have, that would go, well, theater is a vocation. It's some sort of, because people in theater tend to do it because they feel they have a need to, it seems to be easy to make the excuse that, well, we don't have to pay you like a real worker. Yeah. We don't have to offer you health and safety protections because, of course, you're doing this because you love it.
Yeah, and we still have these kinds of fights with, PACT and independent producers and it's all about money. It's always about money. but, who seriously don't want to, as I said, protect their own investment and their own performers.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I mean, we're lucky. We did have one terrible theatre accident that I know about in Ontario, but that because somebody fell off a ladder in a high school gym setting up a theatre, performance space in one that wasn't the performance space and was killed. But, there were all sorts of things that you just in the workplace don't expect to happen. On the other hand, they also get carried away. One of the years I was at Stratford, Workmen's Compensation arrived to do their inspection and said, everybody who works in this building has to wear work boots.
Right. In the entire building.
In the entire building. And it was, it was, it was funny on one hand. On the other hand, it was serious because you can't push a pedal sewing machine with boots on. It doesn't work.
Steel toes, yeah. Exactly.
And you had to be able to feel what you're doing. Well, that there was got to be some solution to this. Couldn't you get different machines? No, this is how a sewing machine works in a factory, because this is a factory making costumes for a play. And it got to the point where it was just hysterical because it went on, and we were asked to sign petitions, we were asked to sign, things, and it was just because they were trying to get a bunch of mostly women, but some men in the costume department to wear boots. The rest of the people already wore boots,
That's crazy. And it also, there was, for many years, especially in alternative theaters, the Ministry of Labor was never around. Like, they had no idea what was going on in those spaces.
No, they didn't.
And if they did, in many cases, they would have been shut down. It wasn't until the start, like in the middle of the 90s, when people started, when the Ministry of Labor came out with its first, theater safety.
Oh,
thing.
unbelievable. No, it's amazing that there weren't dozens of people seriously injured. People did equity when Charmian King fell on a set, which was entirely the set's fault, not hers, and broke her leg. Equity and workmen's compensation did sort of seriously start to work together about actor protection, and that very quickly shifted down to the technical workers as well. If you're used to do electrics, things about ladders and things were rigidly enforced.
That being said, I worked on when I was at Stage West in '94. We routinely did work on a couple different A-frames, which at that time, even in '94 or '93, were illegal.
Yeah.
And that was our daily basis, and we didn't know we were young workers. Nobody told. We were also contractors, so we didn't really pay into that system, and so we weren't aware of it. Let's talk about minimum fees. Because it seemed like a long time. Like Equity had a minimum fee structure for years and years, and there was still a lot of resistance in PACT, and at least in Canada, to actually have a structure that said, well, this will be the base fee based on the house size. What can you remember about that fight?
Well, the fight was primarily amongst the members themselves. And there was a certain amount of fear, which exists to some degree to this day, that if you turn it down because they won't pay you, somebody else will do the job and it'll happen. And that, I think, is always the basis of that kind of quarrel about. But you have to remember, Actors' Equity was founded because actors decided they weren't going to buy their own costumes anymore. Right. And so there's always been that fight going on. But in Canada, it was a fight with ADC for, many, many years. And I think the core of the problem was the notion that if you didn't do it, somebody else would. Right. And it worked 100%. If you said, no, I'm not going to work for that kind of money, well, goodbye, Miss Smith, and Miss Jones will be happy to do it tomorrow.
Also goes to the
And PACT also didn't want to get themselves locked into, a stipulated reimbursement for anything.
right, or a closed shop for
Yeah.
that matter. Yeah. Was there any attempt early on? I may have asked Shalom this, but was there any attempt early on to consider whether or not designers should work in a closed shop, like actors? There would be equity theaters and ADC theaters that only
There
hire-
was, but at the time, my recollection, there was a lot of conversation about that. But the conversation was really that we're not ready because Canadian Actors Equity was basically an offshoot of American Equity. So they were a firmly established outfit and could just take over all those rules and regulations. And ADC, which was a very new organization, didn't have any of that kind of tradition or background or knowledge on the part of managers. I mean, sure, New York producers will argue with you to this day because they're looking to save a buck, but there's a point at which they know if they want, designer X to do their latest musical, they're going to have to pay them at least this and probably more. Now, the other argument that took the same road, more or less, only less well-traveled, was royalties, And again, I think that should be open to producers and designers that, if the show is going to 5 different venues, it's very different than one different venue, and everybody else gets paid, why shouldn't the designer? Yeah, that's true. And so you may be, or if you know that you're working on a hit, but that's almost impossible to tell, and you're going to make, some designers have made tons of money. Literally tons of money out of, a hit that ran on Broadway for 10 years.
Yeah,
But that's a gamble that you always have to take. And so a lot of designers, to this day, don't want to do that.
awesome. Now, how about theater training today? What do you think? What do you think are the important things that designers today should be learning? Maybe that perhaps they haven't learned in the past.
I think where there's a huge gap in theater training, and this may be a very personal opinion and something that I have encountered only recently, is that there are a lot of people out there who I think probably are real artists, but they don't know how it works. And having come from that place myself, I really do believe that there needs to be more emphasis on technical training. In other words, if you go to, the Twitchit Witchit amateur theater in a D or an F house to design something, basically the process has to be the same as if you're designing at Stratford. The process does, not the work. And they don't seem to know that. I had a couple of bad experiences at sort of the end of my time that I had wonderful experiences with assistants at Soul Pepper. I would like to say a little advertisement. But other cases of people who, we would sit back and say, what did they do for 4 years? Because they don't know how to do anything. They don't know the principles of shopping. They don't know the principles of keeping the books. They don't know anything about the technical process of how A gets onto the stage. And that there's more to great art than just knowing, how to manipulate space or tell a story with your set. You have to know something about how it gets there. And that's constantly changing, which you could it's changing slowly enough that you tend to be able to pick that up yourself. But the basic things about, just how to keep the stage manager's notes in order, along with the day's budget or expenditures, is really simple. But you have to know somebody has to tell you how to do it. That's right, yeah. And I find that there's a lot of technical information which doesn't seem to be taught accompanying the job. But as I said, that may be a very personal perspective, and I've just had bad experiences, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, maybe. But I did have a chat with Lorenzo Savuini at Soul Pepper about a month ago, and we had a lovely conversation. And it seems like the idea of apprenticing, for many years, at one point, like especially in the Stratford model, and to a certain extent in the Shaw model, there was a training aspect.
Yes,
that
there
was very focused on training, and those kind of practical skills about managing, especially at Stratford, managing the machine as an assistant. You're really there to sort of get the process down the pipe, right? And understanding all those kind of machinations is important. But then it became over time, I think, probably because the workload you had to do, because the cost of living was going up, but the fees were not. There became a point where you had to take on a lot more work to make the same amount of money, and so assistance just became a way of extra hands. And it wasn't a training position necessarily. It was a get the model done, and then do this, and then be there in my stead, instead of actually having the opportunity to train people. And it seems like that's where like an apprenticeship program would have to fit into that university model somehow, to sort of say,
Yes. Well, it has to fit in somewhere in the process of becoming a fully fledged designer, whether it's at the university level or where it is. But I mean, I remember the first show I did at Stratford. I was given an assistant who had no desire to be a designer. Her function in life was that she was an assistant, and she was fabulous at it. But she had been there for 5 years before, and she knew exactly how it worked. So there was no wasting time about if you want belt buckles that look like this, we have to order them tomorrow because they come from Greece. Or, I mean, that's a far stretch, but it's not quite as far stretched as you think it is. And if you want a lot of painting, we have to talk right now about a schedule and, when it's going to happen and who's going to do it. And from that point of view, those assistants, and I think their role has substantially changed. I think they are now wannabe designers. And I think that there is a huge role. I mean, the film business discovered this in the heyday of the in-studio film, of assistants who had no desire to, run Edith Head down with the truck. They just wanted to make sure that everything that Edith wanted happened. And that's where you really learn, is if you know how the process works, and you get a handle on what the designer wants and how they work, then bingo. But if you've got a new designer, because every space is different. I mean, every space in the world, even just knowing the simplest thing, is different than it is at, theater A is so different than theater B. I mean, particularly if you're working like the Washington Opera, which I've worked at a couple of times, where the wardrobe is nowhere near the theater. It's like half an hour away. So that was a whole other lesson to learn, that, you couldn't just say on the break, would you just mind, letting me talk to Miss So-and-so about the second act change. I mean, it just never happened. And that's where the really good assistant. And I think that like all assistants in any field, whether you're a, assistant nurse or a typist or whatever you are, that there's a place that should be taught, because there are people who are really good at that. And they have some artistic sense and some, knowledge of what good is, but they're basically there to help make it happen,
It seems to be the model in New York. There's a lot of people who work as assistants or associates forever.
I have a very good friend who is the buyer at the Met. And that's all he's ever wanted to do. I mean, he's a graduate of the design program at NYU. And he said it doesn't take you very long to realize that the person who sat beside you at a drawing table for 4 years has a great deal more talent than you do. But I know what to do. And of course, he makes, being at the top of the heap at the Metropolitan Opera, he makes a very good living. But, you know, as he said to me several times, it took a while to, you know, they don't teach you everything about fabric at theater school, and suddenly you're working with a designer who said, I always make my corsets out of X, Y, and Z, and you have no idea what they're talking about. You learn very quickly. And I think I mean, it's like being an RN, being a nursing assistant, you know. There needs to be more, I can only call it technical training for lack of a better word. I mean, it just makes everybody's life easier.
Yeah, absolutely.
Including the theaters.
Yeah, and saves money. Yeah, absolutely. Uses the budget wisely, etc.
Yeah.
All right, so just to wrap it up here, the life of a designer. It seems another one of the things that's come up is that in the 60s and 70s there were a lot more opportunity. Well, there were fewer people doing it.
There were fewer people doing it and a lot more opportunities. And also many, many fewer co-pros.
Right. Yes.
And took a while for designers and actors and managements to work that one out as well. But yes, I think we are probably training too many people to be designers, and a lot of those people, rather than give up and say, well, I'm not Edith Head or whoever, would be that they might become the world's best assistants. And as I said, I think the biggest problem is it looks like we're spending more money. Whereas if you had, you know, person X who had been a design assistant at Stratford for 20 years, and that's what their life was. They weren't, you know, trying to be something else. You would, ultimately, it's a money saver, is what it is, because you don't fart around. You know, even in terms of hours. I mean, you know, because when you go to Stratford, for instance, there are a lot more places to buy materials and shop, because they are willing to do some shopping out of country even. But and if you don't know where those are, you're not going to say it, and you're counting on to find this information kind of by accident. Whereas if the designer said, well, we've had very good luck with this bootmaker in Bulgaria for 5 years, and you know, we'll use them, kind of thing. And I think it's like being any kind of assistant, and we aren't training enough of them.
Yeah, that's a good point. But how about living the life of a designer? Like, do you think that it's a reasonable choice to make these days, given the climate?
It depends.
Of theater?
It depends partly on geography. I mean, it's a very big country, as we know, and it depends, I think, a lot on your personal life and what choices you want to make and how much you're willing to not literally divorce yourself, but separate yourself from your personal life. And if you and your partner can work out something that works for you, fine. I think if you can't, it's led to a lot of unhappy marriages that I know about, and partnerships. You know, because it is precarious. It does mean it's not just working long hours at home. It's that you're often away from where home is, and so it is precarious in more than just the money aspect of it. It's the practice of traveling all the time is precarious.
Yeah, it seems like the people who are actually made, a convincing career out of it are not the ones who have. I mean, some people do, but most people have to work the circuit, and go from regional to regional to regional across the country and back and forth. And so 8 months of the year at least you are traveling, and then the rest of the 4 you're in Stratford or Shaw or out of country doing, the kind of festival work. And so as a lifestyle, I always found that really enjoyable. Like that part of the business.
Yeah, it is. Oh, yeah, I
get to see.
think you can say I did enjoy working, even in Australia. I did an opera in Milwaukee. Milwaukee's not a place that anybody would really want to go for long. But there's enough, and interested enough in the world to say, okay, I'm going to be in Milwaukee for the next 6 weeks. Yeah. But it also, as I said, that's the good side if you're interested in that. And the bad side is just the things I was talking about, is being away and, getting used to living that lifestyle. Yeah. I mean, and it is partly geography. I mean, if you're, a designer working in England, you can be in the farthest theater from your home in an hour and a half, and you can come home at night. You don't have to go anywhere. Well, maybe for a week, but that's it.
Exactly. And that's great. Now, is there anything you'd like to add when you reflect upon your career in the theatre in Canada, or?
I just wish that there was more, not so much for myself anymore, but I wish that there was more acknowledgement in the art world in this country, and I think in any country, but in this country particularly, that scenic and costume and lighting and sound and all those, and video and all those things, they are art. They're not just some technical skill that somebody learned at Ryerson. They're making art. And I think we need to have a lot more acknowledgement of that in the media, in galleries, and anywhere. Because that's the only way you're going to teach the public that this is an art form. And I mean, I'm sure you've been in a costume show somewhere, and the public is going, "Oh, that's how you do that." I mean, my favorite story, which I was told by my friend, is that when they started broadcasting operas from the Met, and this is absolutely true, there is a person who runs around with a bucket of paint. It's a very short, dumpy, middle-aged lady, and touches up hinges that have chipped their paint off. This is in the intermissions between the setups, and that's all she does is touch up. I mean, she's a set painter on their crew, but she's the intermission person. She's been doing it for years. People became fascinated by this, and she started to get fan mail.
Oh, wow. That's extraordinary.
But, because there's thousands of people who have gone to the opera for years, people who have given the opera money because they've got it to give to them, and they had no idea that, you look at the Met is 62 people on a crew. To change from Act 1 to Act 2 is pretty unusual. But people had no idea that that's what happened. I mean, it was just, it happened. And, that's why you were out in the lobby having a drink, and you came back. But anyway, I loved it when Michael and she started to get fan mail.
Yeah, that's great. I wish that we all could get fan mail.
Yeah.
Like the public was supportive enough to acknowledge it. I think that's a reasonable goal.
Yeah.
Right, to set. Well, thank you so much. Is there anything else you want to add?
No.
Okay.
I don't think so.
Well, thank you very much for being on the Title Block. That was designer Martha Mann speaking to me from her home in Toronto in August of 2016. Next time, an interview with sound designer and composer Richard Farron. Also, look out for more Bellows episodes coming soon. The music for this podcast is by Vern Good with voiceover by Gabriel Cropley. Please go to iTunes and give us a review. It'll help get the word out about this podcast and share the history of theatre design in Canada. And you can follow us on Twitter at TheTitleBlockCA and on Facebook.com/TheTitleBlockPodcast. You can send comments and requests by email to TheTitleBlock@gmail.com. Don't forget that if you like the show, support us on Patreon.com. Feel free to share this with your friends, colleagues, students, and teachers, or listen to it while you wonder if Canadian theatre really has left its amateur past in the past. I'm Michael Cruz, and I'll see you next time on The Title Block.